Welcome, Clay. Thanks so much for coming. I am really grateful because of all the current crypto exchanges that I know. No one was even answering my emails, but you were kind enough to offer to come, so I appreciate it. Was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about 0x and what you guys do.
Yeah, so we are a decentralized exchange protocol built on top of the Ethereum blockchain. And what that means in plain English is we actually provide the infrastructure layer that many decentralized exchanges are built on top of. And so decentralized exchange is any exchange of any asset type in the cryptocurrency space that is non-custodial, meaning you actually don't have to store your assets with the exchange. You can actually maintain control of them because each exchange is executed with a smart contract and then ultimately settled to the Ethereum blockchain. So it actually mitigates a lot of the risk associated with custodial exchanges and also provides a lot of use cases beyond pure ICO token exchange. So we actually support exchange of things like non-fungible tokens, which are things like video game assets, as well as prediction markets and securities tokens, and basically anything that can be tokenized in exchange. We ultimately want to be the core piece of infrastructure that allows for that to happen.
Fantastic. It sounds like you're a little bit more diversified than some of the other exchanges. So tell me, with all the dramas that have been happening, hacking and Quadriga CXs, that's a real drama. And I'm just wondering, what do you think's going on with the crypto exchange world?
Yeah, so I think that as the value of assets continues to appreciate, the fact that there is this massive honeypot of assets sitting in these exchanges in their hot wallets, that risk is always going to exist for hackers to try to hack exchanges. And while the best security in the world is great, but it can still be exploited. And so nothing's new from the inception of Bitcoin all the way through now. People are just motivated by accessing funds any way they can, and so that's what we're seeing play out. I think what we see now, though, is because there are more regulatory filings happening, like the potential for a Bitcoin ETF, the screws are being tightened, and the scrutiny of exchange security is being assessed, as well as exchange volumes. So I think that that's more a function of why you see the focus now. I think the hacks are going to continue to happen as long as the opportunity for profit exists. So yeah, something that's more of the same, but I guess with a little bit more of a microscope on it.
And with Quadriga CX, that was just like amazing that he was the founder was the only one that had the keys to all that money. Couldn't get my mind
around. Of being your own bank. If you lose your private keys and you don't have a solution in place to delegate those to your next of kin, assuming he's dead, that risk does exist. So yeah.
Incredible. Such smart people, but so stupid on some level. And what do you think needs to happen now in the crypto exchange world, to restore trust and give people a bit of sense of safety? Because obviously it's coming into the mainstream now, and these are they have to implement certain things so that people will use them.
Yeah, so I think more transparency is probably one of the first things that needs to happen, because one of the core issues that regulators have seen within the space is market manipulation. And so things like the Bitwise report that recently came out that showed that much of the quote reported exchange volume is actually fake is something that's much needed in the space, because that allows you to peel back the onion and see how much there is there, and allows regulators to make the right assessments. I think too, you'll start to see some consolidation in the exchange space, the centralized exchange space, in that folks that are shown to be repeatedly showing this spoofed volume or fake volume won't have a business model, and will lose customers just because they are not as transparent as they need to be. And I think there actually is a defensive moat for centralized exchanges to have a closer eye from regulators, because that instills trust with the public, because the ultimate counterparty risk is whether or not you can have some recourse if something goes wrong. And I think the regulatory checkmark is probably a helpful piece to that. I think too, migration to self-custody is another thing that's important to have happen.
Which you guys have. Right?
Yeah. And I think that that's something that we'll see continue to proliferate, especially as the focus on security and who actually has custody of your assets continues to grow. Yeah.
And do you see the SEC sort of stepping into this domain and sort of trying to regulate it a little bit more? Because I know they've had their nose or their feet in the whole ICO STO world.
Yeah, I think that they are going to take a very nuanced approach to the whole market because they run the macro risk of stifling innovation in the space. And so I think it'll be a very tempered approach, but they will probably have generalized guidance. In the case of something like an ETF, they obviously are the regulatory body that would oversee that implementation, so they'll take a role there. But my hope, and I think the general community's hope, is that they take a very nuanced position in terms of assessing the market. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's hope that's a brighter future than it has been recently for crypto exchanges.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for coming. I'm really looking forward to the panel.
Yeah, sure thing. Looking forward to it. Thank you.